one of the things that always happens in talks like this is people keep a checklist, right? And they think, when is he going to mention this? So if I don't mention that the Mufti of Jerusalem was in league with the Nazis, they go, why didn't you say that? Or if I don't mention that, new historians in Israel are saying there was a certain amount of ethnic cleansing, why didn't you mention that? I can't mention everything here. I'm going to try to keep it as limited as I can, but realize that the things that I leave out are probably because we don't have about 90 years to discuss this. It's very difficult for people whom I call passionate moderates to get a hearing in the corridors of power in the United States. By passionate moderates, I'm talking about Amenu, the group that invited me, on whose board I serve. I'm talking about Americans for Peace Now, for Tzedek V'Shalom, and J Street, on whose advisory council I sit. Within the American Jewish community, we're really left. We're part of the pro-Israel left. But in the broader ideological spectrum, we're pretty moderate. We're really right in the center. I've been doing work for people like this, both voluntarily and professionally, for about 25 years. Way back before it was fashionable with Peace Now, we tried to build support within the Jewish community for Israelis who believed the survival of the Jewish state and a democratic Israel was endangered by the occupation. We promoted, before it was possible, before it was fashionable, not possible, the creation of a Palestinian state, one that lived side by side in Israel with peace and security. And we tried to show the political elite in Washington that the conventional Israel lobby did not speak for the majority of American Jews, as many polls showed. Well, we blew it. We failed. As far as most people in power in Washington are concerned, up until fairly recently, the only Jews of any political consequence in the United States are represented by AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, which is the most important group in what I call the conventional Israel lobby, and other groups, some to its right, some to its left. So I decided in 2005 to go back, take part-time off from my day job, and find out why. For years I've been hearing about these polls who say most Jews agree with me. Well, where have they been? Why have the doves been silent all of these years? And then I started looking into, well, why has AIPAC and the Conference of Presidents of American Jewish Organizations, which is the main umbrella group, why have they been so successful? And then I started thinking, well, let me turn this into a book. And the third part of the book, because you have to have more than 100 pages, is how can we build a lobby for the rest of us? Is it possible to transform both the current Israel, pro-Israel American Jewish community and have other Americans who can provide a different voice to people in power in Washington? And most of what I've written about is about domestic politics, but I have to basically talk about some of the political assumptions that I have, which have to do with what's going on obviously in Israel and in the Palestinian territories and in the rest of the Middle East. Excuse me a second. We're okay? I'm going to intersperse this book with my talk with a few actual quotes from my book. Now, I misunderstood something. I thought that in order to come to this event, you were legally obligated to buy my book. Apparently not. So what I've done is I've put something here that talks about some of the quotes that you'll find if you actually buy the thing. And this is the first assumption. The reasons to care about any of this can be found in the Middle East. In the exhausted, agonized faces of Palestinians digging for their loved ones, in the ruins of homes destroyed by the Israelis in Gaza Strip, or in other Palestinians forced to wait for hours at checkpoints before they can move from one West Bank village to another. They can be found in the cemeteries visited by still grieving Israeli parents of suicide bomb victims and soldiers killed in battle, or in the beleaguered young Israelis at checkpoints who are enforcing an occupation many of them hope will end. They can be found in the most heartbreaking summary of this conflict that has ever been written. A few words from the Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai. Quote, "The howl of the orphans is passed from one generation to the next, as in a relay race. The baton never falls." But they can also be found in the streets of Tallahassee, Cleveland, and San Francisco. One of my underlying assumptions is that it is vitally important for America to help solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict because it's in our interest to do so. It's almost bizarre that it's necessary to take the trouble to point this out because the assertion is self-evident. But Israeli leaders and many of their American supporters either deny it or try to wish it away. What happens in Israel and the rest of the Middle East is America's business too. And American citizens, Jews and non-Jews, not only have the right to expect certain things of our ally Israel, they have an obligation, because what happens in the region directly affects their families, friends, and neighbors. Unfortunately, that is still a radical notion in much of the organized pro-Israel community, where the idea of America as the protector of a besieged state still prevails. And the notion that Israel can help protect the United States is rarely articulated. That's my first assumption. My second assumption is that the only way for Israelis and Palestinians and for the rest of us to awake from this nightmare is with a two-state solution.
Can you repeat your first assumption, please? Last sentence you wrote.
The last sentence is, unfortunately, that is still a radical notion in much of the organized pro-Israel community, where the idea of America as the protector of a besieged Jewish state still prevails, and the notion that Israel can help protect the United States is rarely articulated. I'm sure you're going to ask me what I meant by that. I'll be happy to explain it. The goal of a two-state solution seems more distant every day. As I say in the book, some people make a kind of rhetorical blood sport of listing all the reasons why it's too late. It's too late because the Palestinians have shown they have no interest in living with Israel in peace. You can see that because we withdrew from the Gaza Strip unilaterally and the rockets started falling. On the other hand, it's too late because with every bypass road and sewage line and settlement expansion, it'll be harder and harder to get rid of entrenched Jewish settlers. It's too late, give it up. And their answer is, they don't have an answer. A one-state solution is what some of the people on the left, like Mr. N, who called me a Nazi, and like Jenny, who also called me a Nazi, actually, believe in. But it's not practical. It'll turn into the kind of ethnic bloodshed that will make what happened in Yugoslavia seem like a garden party. So even if you believe that Israel has absolutely no right to exist, and there are people who believe that, if you want to help the Palestinian people, the idea of a one-state, binational, unitary state is not going to work. So we're left with the two-state solution, flawed as that is. My third assumption is that this conflict can't possibly be solved without American help. And that must include a willingness for the U.S. to lean on both sides of the conflict, as opposed to just one side. There's a whole chapter devoted to Israelis who share the idea about diplomatic interventions Israel needs from the U.S. We've already tried this game of having the two parties negotiate pretty much on their own, and we know it doesn't work. There's an asymmetry of power, and we know that when an occupying country that has massive military power is trying to negotiate the terms of its release from occupied territory with an occupied people, it doesn't work. Every single international diplomat who has any sense and has written about this will say that. Now, there are international diplomats who have no sense who've said the other things. But there was a study by Dan Kurtzer, the former ambassador to Egypt as well as Israel, and Scott Leszczynski, sponsored by the U.S. Institute of Peace. And again, all of the diplomats that they interviewed essentially said the same thing. We can't solve this without the United States. And what does that mean? To me and my camp, American engagement doesn't mean putting overt pressure on Israel to compromise its core security requirements. It does mean insisting that the Netanyahu government, for example, keeps the promises it makes in agreements and stops settlement expansion once and for all. It also means insisting that the Palestinians do everything possible to stop exacerbating Israeli fears that the West Bank will be a staging ground for Hamas rockets. And it means the U.S. president has to have the political wiggle room to suggest ideas that neither side is happy with, but both sides could conceivably live with. It means that if either side breaks its promises or stalls the journey to peace, there will be consequences from the U.S. Real penalties, not just ineffectual complaints. Now, I don't want to dwell on these ideas here. And I know what's spinning around in all your heads are questions, arguments that you want to talk about. And obviously, I can't stop you from asking questions about it. I was just laying those out because those are the basic principles that kind of undergird what I'm about to say about domestic politics. And one of the principles is that what I call the conventional Israel lobby, AIPAC, but also other organizations, do not want any of the things I just described to happen. They do not want any daylight, is the term, between official Israeli positions and official American positions. And I think that's a disastrous position to take, both for the Israeli people and the Palestinian people and the American people.